area, 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master, talking about the head on the Belize and dollar, because patriots, all people who love them country bad, bad love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. Country bad, bad love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This is we
Good morning once again. My name is Mutota, and this is Sunday Review from XTV and Creme Radio in Belize. Usually this show is hosted by Sister Yaya Marin Coleman, and I'm the co-host. Unfortunately, Sister Yaya is out of the country, and I will be hosting Sunday Review this morning. Sunday Review is the only news show in Belize in which we look at news from around the Caribbean and try to give it our interpretation relevant to the Caribbean and Caribbean people. This morning, we have two guests with us. One is on in the person of Brother Gerry Kangalee, Comrade Gerry Kangalee, trade unionist, former education officer of the National Workers Union of Trinidad and Tobago, and also of the OWTU, researcher, author. Please welcome our guest, Dr. Brother Kangalee, and we're supposed to have also Jomo Sanga Thomas, at law, commentator, journalist, and former head of the National Assembly, Speaker of the National Assembly in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Unfortunately, he's having some technical problems. So we will begin this morning's program with our first guest, Comrade Gerry Kangalee, and we'll ask Comrade Kangalee to introduce himself briefly, and then we'll get into the show where we'll read pieces of the news and ask you to give your interpretation of how you see these events unfolding in the Caribbean. So at this point, I introduce Comrade Kangalee to give us a bit about who he is and what he has done in the last few years. Comrade Kangalee.
Yeah, thank you, Aku. My name is Gerry Kangalee. I am a retired trade unionist. I'm no longer an education officer. I used to be an education officer in the Oilfield Workers Trade Union for near 30 years. I also used to be the education officer of the National Workers Union until about 3 or 4 years ago, when my failing health, I have to say, at least I had some health problems, and I had to, try to organize myself in such a way that I could survive, right? I used to be the editor of the OWTU newspaper, the Vanguard, and also the editor of the now defunct newspaper of the Committee for Labor Solidarity, which was called Hold the Fort. So my focus used to be, or it still is, on research, trying to find out what is happening under the surface and so on. I've been doing that for a lot of years. Although I am now retired and so on, I still maintain connections with the trade union movement and with people who are active in the progressive movement and so on, right? I am, as I said, I am not any longer involved at any official level in any of the trade unions, but I still do have my connections, and I still am able to interact with leadership in some of the unions and so on. So I think I have a pretty clear idea of what is happening in the trade union movement and in the country, particularly at this time, when, as we all know, we are under some very difficult circumstances that have arisen because of the position of the United States and their attitude towards what is happening in Venezuela and the consequences of that for the Caribbean. So I suspect that is what we're probably going to talk a lot about today. What are the consequences of the United States military intervention in the Caribbean? So I think that's enough for me.
Yeah, yes, we will. I think your head is out of the camera at various points.
Okay.
Right, yeah. Okay. So
right.
Yes. So this morning we will begin from our country, Trinidad and Tobago. And as you know, Trinidad and Tobago has been very much involved by statements the Prime Minister made in supporting the U.S. policy in the Caribbean. So we will read the headline from one of the Trinidad newspapers this morning and ask you to make your commentary and to give your interpretation of what these particular comments may mean in the context of what is happening. And this particular headline comes from one of the papers in Trinidad, and it's from the former UNC MP who cautions against supporting U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean. And so I'll read a couple of the paragraphs, and then you can come in and have your say.
Who made the statement, Akko?
I will read it for you now. I'll read it for you. All right.
Okay.
Former UNC MP Rodney Charles has cautioned the government on its support for the ongoing U.S. military deployment in the Southern Caribbean and all matters relating to it. Charles, who served as Trinidad and Tobago's UN ambassador during Prime Minister Kamala Bissesa's first administration, sounded his warning in a Facebook post on December 20th. He was also the UNC Shadow Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Minister from September 15 to April 2025 while the party was in opposition. Charles, who publicly disagreed with Prasad Bissesa's leadership, chose to retire from electoral politics. He said in his statements, it cannot be interpreted by anyone as being a critic of U.S. action in the Caribbean. I'm not anti-U.S., because I went to Carleton University. I was briefly a White House press intern. He also said he has relatives in the U.S. military. Charles said, I still believe in the spirit and intent of the U.S. Constitution. It's just that I love Trinidad and Tobago more. Referring to Prasad Bissesa's ongoing support for all aspects of deployment, Charles said, I think that we are going down a very dangerous path. We do not have a well thought out or nuanced foreign policy that serves our interests. And so I will stop here, and I don't know if you gathered what he said, and you can give us your commentary on what the former MP and former UN representative for Trinidad and Tobago to the UN in the previous Kamala Prasad Bissesa's administration. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, two things struck me. One is while he is making a correct point about the danger, the slippery slope, or whatever, I can't remember how he said it, that the Bissesa, the Prasad Bissesa administration is carrying the country down. That is a correct thing. I mean, we're heading down a road where if anything happens with Venezuela and the United States, Trinidad and Tobago could be deemed as a co-belligerent, meaning that if there is a military conflict between two countries and you are allowing your country to facilitate, as we are doing, in terms of particularly the establishment of the radar in Tobago, and the fact that the U.S. has been given carte blanche to utilize both the international airports in the country in terms of, carrying about their military activities and so on, so that we are really heading down a slippery slope. If we ended up being a co-belligerent, then we would have to expect to be treated as such by the Venezuelans. So, of course, yes, it is a dangerous time, and so on. And what made me slightly amused is that while he's making that point, the ex-MP or the ex-minister, the ex-foreign minister of Trinidad and Tobago is making sure that he puts it out there that, he loves the United States, he went to school there, and so on, and so on, and he loves Trinidad more, and so on. So what he is trying to do is, because he's no longer part of the cabinet. If he was part of the cabinet, I don't expect he would have been saying that, or he'd have been thrown out of the cabinet, I presume, right? I suspect there are other people within the administration who are not too happy with what is happening. But I won't expect them to come out and say anything about it, because when it comes down to that, in terms of the politicians we have in the Caribbean, we could quote Martin Carter when he said that a mouth is always muzzled by the food it eats to live. Or as we say in Trinidad, eat a food politicians. So that while there may be politicians within the cabinet who are not too keen on what is happening, you don't expect them to say anything, right? What is happening here is that there are a lot of not misunderstandings, there are a lot of disinformation being bandied about. The whole question of, what Mrs. Prasad Bissessa is basing her position on is that she's trying to convince the country and the world and maybe herself that what the US is doing in the Caribbean is dealing with cartels and drugs and so on, which is absolutely ridiculous. You don't bring aircraft carriers and missile boats and whatever they call these things, into the Caribbean to deal with drug running. In fact, while they were murdering people in the Southern Caribbean and in the Northern Caribbean, the US Coast Guard was arresting drug runners, taking them into custody, and so on. Especially of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and so on. Yet in the Southern Caribbean, you have a situation where you are saying, I think that's a drug boat, and you blast it to smithereens. So
let me just intervene here, Gerry. Let me just intervene here a bit in that, just support the point you made before I bring in Brother Jomo, who I see is on here. While they were doing that, the US was freeing an actually convicted drug trafficker, the former president of Honduras, who was tried and convicted in the US, and sentenced to 45 years, and then Trump pardoned him. So obviously, it supports your point that this whole thing is farcical. But I wanted to bring in my other guest here because he was having some technical problem. Jomo Sanga Thomas, who I introduced earlier, who's an attorney at law, commentator, journalist, and former Speaker of the National Assembly in Dominica. I'm not sorry, in St. Vincent the Grenadines. St. Vincent the Grenadines. Yeah. So, brother, I don't know if you heard the headline, the piece I read from Trinidad just now. I'll read it again. It's about the former representative of Trinidad and Tobago to the UN under the previous Kamla Prasad Bissessa administration, basically saying that we are heading down a slippery slope. Did you hear the piece I read? Brother Jomo? You need to unmute. You are muted. Unmute. You are muted.
I did not hear it, but I can imagine any sensible.
Well, let me just read a brief for it, okay? Sure. Former UNC MP Rodney Charles has cautioned the government on its support for the ongoing US military deployment in the Southern Caribbean and all matters relating to it. Charles, who served as Trinidad and Tobago's UN ambassador during Prime Minister Kamla Bissessa's first administration, sounded his warning on a Facebook page on December 20th. He was also the UNC's shadow foreign and CARICOM affairs minister from September 2015 to April 2025, while the party was in opposition. Okay? Yes. Charles said his comments should not be interpreted by anyone as him being a critic of the US action in the Caribbean. I am not anti-US. I'm a postgrad student of Carleton University. I was briefly a White House press intern and I also did a stint at the State Department. Charles said he also has relatives who serve in the US military. I still believe in the spirit and intent of the US Constitution. However, I think that we are going down a very, very dangerous path. We do not have well thought out or nuanced foreign policy that serves our interests. So I would like you to respond to that.
Well, you give it with one hand and you take it with the other. I think that a lot of critics of US foreign policy are always placed into that in an enviable position where we are told the same thing happens to me here because I spent 21 years in the United States. I got my bachelor's degree here, my master's degree here at Howard University, and I did law school in the United States. So people always ask me, well, wow, why are you so critical of the United States when you spend all this time there and you got basically your foundation? And my response is always the same. I don't have a problem with the United States. I don't have. I spent 21 very good years in the United States. I loved it. I went across the country. As I said, I studied in New Jersey. I studied in Washington, D.C. I studied and worked in New York. I had a lot of practice in New York for 10 years before I came back to the Caribbean and to St. Vincent. The difficulty that I have, and I had it even before I went to the United States, is a serious problem with U.S. foreign policy and the ways in which the United States has dealt with the global South. And I have been a long-time critic of American foreign policy forays, military ventures across the world. So this gentleman who clearly has to show his bona fides. Look, I don't have anything against the United States. I don't think there are few people who have anything against any country in the world. We may be critical at one point or the other with one issue or the other, reflecting the official government policy. But you know, it is said, I think it was James Baldwin who first said it, and then Ta-Nehisi Coates said it recently in one of his books. He says, I am most critical of my country because my country is all I've got. So the critique that one may make from time to time of a given government, whether it's the Trinidad government or the Vincentian government or the American government, has nothing to do with hatred for the country. It has to do with one's perception about a particular policy direction. And in a democracy where notions of free speech and free speech rights and so on, those should be held paramount. So I don't make any kind of caveat when I'm criticizing. I'm just criticizing because I think that's the right thing to do at the right time. And I don't believe that there's any serious, clear-headed, reasoned person in the world who would conclude that what the United States is doing in the Southern Caribbean at this point in time is just horrible. It can possibly precipitate a crisis that we have not seen. I've seen parallels where people say, oh, we're at the point of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think where we are, this is even worse, because at least you had rational leaders on one side, the Soviets, and they pulled back. I am not so sure that the current US administration is rational, and consequently, they may lead to very, very bad things happening in our region. For one thing, I have told my friends, and I've told anyone who's willing to listen, if the US congressional law, which was passed, which says that they should do a full disclosure on the Epstein files, if they take that to its logical conclusion, I am absolutely convinced that the President of the United States would be implicated, and he would do as Bill Clinton did when the story about Monica Lewinsky broke. Remember what he did then? He bombed Somalia. He bombed Somalia. Similarly, I think that's what...
Well, let me just intervene on that because you are correct. It's the same thing Reagan did.
Right, after the Lebanon bombing.
Thing. He needed a distraction. So what he did, he invaded Grenada. And so US presidents, whenever they have a crisis, they use some kind of diversion. And war is usually one of the things they use because it unites the American population. But before, I don't know if Comrade Kangalee want to make any comment before we move on to the next news headline.
Well, we're talking about crisis, that affects particular American administrations and how they respond to it. But I think it's a little worse than that now, because I think the entire relationship between what you can call the American empire, if you want to call it that, and not only the global South, but even its former allies and so on. You are seeing that the American, the imperialist system that they have been operating since the Second World War is in serious problems. And if you look at the national security strategy that they have just released, very interesting, right? In terms of what this is saying, just let me read a little piece for you. We want to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable and so on. We want a hemisphere whose governments cooperate with us against narco-terrorist cartels and so on. We want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of the assets. And that supports critical supply chains. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a, quote, Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. People, you would expect people like us to say that, but they have reached to that point where they hide nothing. The Monroe Doctrine has been, remember Roosevelt, the first Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, yeah?
Teddy was the first one. Teddy was the first.
Teddy Roosevelt, that's right. He was the one who came up with the Roosevelt corollary. That is when the United States became strong enough in terms of their economy and their military to be able to actually put into practice what the Monroe Doctrine had said that they were all about, that they don't want any foreign people to come in here and so on. This is our backyard and so on. And that corollary from Roosevelt led to the invasion of Cuba, the annexation of Puerto Rico, they invaded into the Dominican Republic, into Haiti, and so on, right? And now Trump, well, he, his personality is that he's really the greatest thing that was, that the world has ever seen, and so on. But he also wants his own corollary, the Trump corollary, right? They go on a little later in that national security strategy, because if you look at the strategy, it is there's a lot of emphasis upon what happens in the Western Hemisphere. And normally, when you look at those national security strategies, you hear a lot of talk about China, about the Indo-Pacific, what is happening, and so on. But today, the claim is within the national security strategy, they say that the U.S. will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere, and so on. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, or, and this is important, to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. This Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is a common sense and potent restoration of American power and so on. Right? What we are seeing here is that unlike what we have seen over the last few decades, we have seen now a renewed emphasis on Latin America, whereas before they were convinced that, well, Latin America is in our backyard, whatever we do, it happens. It's going to, they're going to accept. What we are seeing now, if you look at the trade figures and so on, is China has penetrated South America to a great extent, Brazil, even Argentina, Venezuela, and so on. A lot of investment and so on is coming out of China, and some from Russia, but more military and so on. And it is obvious that what is happening is that the US is seeing its hegemonic power being eroded, because their power, in the final analysis, it depends on how strong you are economically. And if you see a great power,
let me interject here a bit, Gerry, right? Because you made a point about foreign, and I will want Brother Jomo to comment on this, because I think it's a very important. Let me just read the piece here from out of St. Lucia, because this is what we do. We look at different pieces of the news in the Caribbean and try to interpret this news. So I want Brother Jomo to comment on this, and then you could come back, right? I think we have about 8 minutes before we go on break. The headline is called "The Real Cost of Uber for St. Lucia," and because you made a point about foreign control of the Caribbean as part of the Trump corollary, re-emphasizing its dominance in the Caribbean. Now, recently there is I read a couple of weeks ago that Uber is coming to St. Lucia. The government has allowed Uber to come into St. Lucia. This has serious consequences. So I want to read it and then have you all comment on this. And then we're going to go back to what we were speaking about, because there's an article I want to connect the previous discussion. But let me read this piece for commentary here. The real cost of Uber in St. Lucia. And I'll read possibly 2 paragraphs. It's been a few years since I first heard talk of Uber, a ride-hailing service being introduced in St. Lucia. As I listened with great pain to a news story about the possibility of this soon becoming a reality, I couldn't help but think about what it could mean for our economy, but most of all for our local taxi drivers. I write as a son of a former taxi driver and as someone who has used Uber and similar services like Bolt and Lyft in several countries. First, let me remind you of something from our past. In the late 1990s, consideration was being given to a regional air carrier flying guests who had landed at Hwanira International Airport and then to Fiji to save them the hassle of the 75-minute drive to their hotels in the north. I remember as a child listening to my father discussing this with his brother and also a taxi driver. The one thing that has stayed with me from that conversation was his sense of helplessness. His livelihood was being threatened, and I felt helpless too, knowing that I would have been affected as well. Thankfully, that plan never materialized. I write now because I do not want to stand with that same feeling of helplessness again. My father is no longer alive, but I write on his behalf. I write on behalf of his colleagues who are still in the sector, and I write on behalf of some of their sons who have continued in their father's footsteps to provide for their families, right? Let me outline why the introduction of Uber or similar service would not be good for our country. One, it will be in direct competition with our local taxi drivers. Two, it will give limited alternatives for displaced workers. Three, it will reduce local earnings. Four, it will repatriate profits overseas. Uber collects a 15 to 30% commission every trip. That means a significant portion of revenue generated by both visitors and locals would be sent to an international company. Five, gains for some, losses for many, and so on. And then several countries already have expressed regret. So, Brother Jomo, could you comment on this? I know living in the Eastern Caribbean, and based on what we are seeing relative to talk about, this is U.S. backyard and Venezuela oil. So now we look like our transport services not belong to you. Comment on that and allow Kangalee on that after.
It's interesting that you read this piece because just yesterday I was having a conversation with my daughter's uncle who is visiting with me. And he was making the identical point, but he was making it in the context of the rise of Uber and all of these other outfits in the United States and the debilitating effect it has had on ordinary working class people. For one thing, he made the point that the medallions are now like $1 million. You have to pay $1 million. It's pushing more and more ordinary working class, middle class people out of the taxi trade. But beyond that, he says that there's also a rise in suicides among these drivers who are finding it increasingly difficult to work and to make ends meet and to take care of their families and so on. So with this incursion into the Caribbean, it's a further internationalization of capital in the sense that the big and powerful and mighty companies and corporations are simply carving up the world and making it easy for them to make even more and more money at a time when the vast majority of people are catching hell. So this does not augur well for ordinary people, not only in St. Lucia where it's happening now, but you can be sure sometime soon it may be in Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana if it's not there yet. I think they're going to go for the bigger countries with the larger populations first, probably Dominican Republic, Haiti, and so on. And then later come into the smaller ones like St. Vincent and Grenada. So it does not augur well at all, but it shows that capital knows no bounds, that every time it spies an opportunity, it's going to go for that opportunity. It's going to try to maximize profit at the expense of people. I think that's the lesson that we need to draw from this.
Kangalee, as a labor leader and a trade unionist of many years, your take on that, please.
I think what the brother has just said covers the ground in that it's not only just in the question of the transportation, right? It's all across the board in terms of capital investment. Like for instance, in Trinidad, we talk about what may be called franchise capitalism, in that all these American fast food outlets and so on, you know, Churches, Wendy's, KFC, whatever, I can't remember all of them, McDonald's and all these people, they are actually dominating the question of food and so on in the Caribbean in terms of restaurant type stuff, right? In that, what they have been able to do is to link up with the big conglomerates who are engaged in import. You know, so we will import all these things, we will set up all these franchise systems around the place and so on. A lot of the thing is not local, to say that you're creating linkages with the local agricultural industry and so on. But what you are doing is ensuring that there are certain social effects of these things that are not, that are crippling working people, in the sense that you have a lot of women working in these areas, right? Very low paid, sometimes under the minimum wage, sometimes just above the minimum wage and so on. And what you are, the kinds of shifts that they have to do is causing a lot of problems. These women, they finish work at 10 o'clock in the night. And you know, Trinidad, how it is these days, right? And if you don't have your own transport, you know, a lot of problems. Or anything could happen out there. These people are now talking about developing local industry, local agriculture, local food products, and so on. And then you turn around and says, well, you know, look, people are only buying all this KFC and all this kinds of stuff. But what do you want them to do? The thing, one, is cheaper than the other, than the local stuff. And two, if you are a working woman who has 3 or 4 children living in an underserved area and so on, you finish work at 10 o'clock. You have to go home after that to feed your children and so on. You can't go home there and start to cook food and all of that. You just buy what it is on the street and you carry it home. So a lot of these interventions from international capital has deleterious effects upon the lifestyle of working people. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse, in the sense that the local, how shall we define them? The local merchant capitalists, the local comprador capitalists, it is not in their interest to develop local industry. It is in their interest to import stuff, put a markup on it, and sell it, to people and so on. So that the whole question of the expansion of international capital into the global south, into the Caribbean and so on, I think it's well underway. And without organized resistance, to that kind of thing, I don't think we're going to see it getting any better soon, right? International capital is engaging in, they're looking for markets in anywhere. The entire globe, the entire planet is their market. And, they will go into the smallest markets and squeeze out whoever is there in order for them to be able to keep their profitability up. Did you see a story? Just one last thing.
We have to go to our break now.
No problem.
Yeah, on that point, and we'll come back. We'll break for about 5 minutes and we'll come back. You can stay on. But you're correct. I also just saw recently where Walmart has now moved into South Africa, which is not something that augurs well for the African continent at all. But at this point, we'll take our first break and we'll return in about 5 minutes.
Still like one dream, because I say at the age of 63, I can say I own my own house. I can honestly say, and it get me weak. Before this, I was living on the mobile home, right? And then after a while, it started to go in and start to lock up and things.
1, 2, 3.
Actually, I may give up. I used to cry and like time I said, Lord, please. And there comes Miss Mar. I always say, if you're not serious about something, don't pray for it. Don't pray about it. And I ask my God, please lead the Good Samaritan to me.
The housing program of the government of Belize, which is administered through the Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing, is definitely, without question, one of the best programs our government has to offer, providing an opportunity for Belizeans who are in need to own their own home. And so I'm very, very happy for Ms. Beverly Harris and her family. She has been asking for support and help with her home for a long time, and I'm very, very glad that with the kind support of the Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing that we were able to get this done for her.
I'm thankful. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give 20. I love it. I love it.
Driving around, particularly during this holiday season, can be quite an experience. Families are out shopping and the streets are buzzing with excitement. It reminds me that this season is all about connections, and it starts with how we treat each other, even on the road. When I'm behind the wheel, I always remind myself that being on the road is more than just following the rules. It's about looking out for each other and making sure we all get home safely to our families. This season, let's continue to be alert and be kind on the road. Be courteous, give way, and stay safe. A message from BEL.
This holiday season, stay connected across borders with Smart's Mexico and now USA roaming bundles. Available now through December 31st. Enjoy 4,096 megabytes of roaming data for only $27 or other packages for as low as $8. Staying home for the holidays? Sign up for a postpaid plan and get a Samsung A16 for as low as $190 or Samsung A26 for $315, or pick up devices without a plan starting at $100 for our GST weekend special. And this December, text to win. Simply text WIN to 438 for your chance to win big. Each entry is just $1 of prepaid credit. More entries mean more chances to win daily prizes like fuel vouchers, groceries, and more, leading to our big giveaway week, December 15th to 24th. We're giving away amazing prizes like fridge, TV, stove. And on December 24th, the grand prize of $5,000 will be announced. These deals won't last long, so make the smart switch today. Travel more, share more, and save more with Smart. Smart, bringing people together.
What made me want to start my journey in terms of owning a home was basically me having my own space, my own domain, and having something extremely special for my family. That feeling was indescribable. It was amazing, you know, moving in the first time, seeing all the new furniture, the new paint, the new accessories. I was amazed. Home for the holidays means to me bonding with my family, having an amazing time in the Christmas spirit. I would highly recommend Atlantic Bank's personal loans for home renovations because of what it did for me. I fixed my kitchen, I fixed my storage, I fixed my master bedroom, my showers, you name it, I fixed it.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
It's Christmas time at Brothers Habet and Habet, and we have some great gifts for you, like our signature 15% off all Berger, Penta, and domestic paints, and 30 to 40% off selected and discontinued colors, 15% off all power tools, 20 to 30% off select tiles, 20 to 65% off light fixtures, and 40% off sunlight windows and mirrors. Also, GST free days on December 6th and 20th. Plus, for every $50 you spend, get a chance to win a $500 gift certificate in our 12 Days of Christmas giveaway. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us at Brothers Habet and Habet.
This a trend New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. From the border to the boulevard, physical fit. On to my agony, strength in it. Big up the farmer champions, them we do it. But who will take the crown in a 2026? This a Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. Straight to Belize from the northern district. To win this with a happy cyclist dream. They make them boast them take the sugar and cream. This a Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream.
It's the Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. All top-class riders hit the pavement for the start of the cycling calendar. Thursday, January 1st, it's the Creme New Year's Day Cycling Classic.
This a Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream, 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 cream.
Guatemala, this a VTA, we are figure. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head and the Belize.
Once again, welcome to Sunday Review, and where we make sense of the news from around the Caribbean. Our guests this morning, Jomo Sanga Thomas, journalist and attorney from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Comrade Gerry Kangalee, former trade union leader and education and research officer. We continue with our news, and this time we are going to read a headline from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And this article is actually written by one of our guests this morning, who is Dr. Jomo Sanga Thomas. And I will read the headline.
That's a surprise.
I will ask Brother Kangalee to comment first, and then ask Brother Jomo to comment on why he started. The headline is Tracing U.S. Aggression from Chavez to Today. And I will read a couple of paragraphs. On April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before he was brutally gunned down by forces hostile to his truth-telling and opposition to violence, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech titled Beyond Vietnam. In this speech, Dr. King warned that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Two significant developments occurred early this year. The United States made a crucial name change and crossed a significant milestone. The Department of Defense was renamed the Department of War, and the U.S. military budget for the first time exceeded $1 trillion. To police the entire world, thus making it safe for American ruling circles, Washington maintains 750 military bases across 80 countries. Looking at this reality, particularly at a time when the United States was laboring under immense social and economic problems, Dr. King declared America to be the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. In that same speech, Dr. King warned, America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. 57 years after his assassination, things have only gotten worse, with the American leadership becoming increasingly reckless with its military adventures over the last 3 years. Both the Biden and Trump administrations, with their European vassals in tow, have inched the world closer to nuclear Armageddon with the provocative adventures in Ukraine by sending military personnel to operate sophisticated military machinery that loads highly explosive and destructive armaments into Russia. The article is longer, so I'll just read these two paragraphs. I'll ask Comrade Kangalee to comment, and then ask Brother Jomo to comment on what is his reason for writing this article. So, Comrade Kangalee.
Well, I think what was stated is pretty clear, and I support what he has said 100%. What is my view is that the reason for this intensification of military activity is because of the weakening of American capitalism. The very fact that you have something called Make America Great Again suggests that there are people who realize that the American dominance that has been there since the Second World War is no longer fit for purpose. They can no longer, I mean, somebody made the point, I can't remember who, that you cannot be an empire and be the biggest debtor country in the world. That your future, the way you are moving going forward, is dependent upon what other countries can do. If China decides to dump American bonds and so on, there are going to be a lot of problems. Therefore, my point is there that I don't think this thing is going to ease, and it's nothing to do with Trump, personally or particularly, the brother made the point about what 1967 people were seeing what was going to happen. Let us just go back a little bit in terms of the American Venezuela something, right? Since the 1990s, and particularly since 2007, the relationship between the US and Venezuela has, been in a nosedive. American sanctions, mass migration, poverty, all kinds of stuff taking place in Venezuela because the Americans have decided that they are not going to tolerate. It's not just a question of the oil. Yes, it is the oil, a lot of oil and so on. But there is also another thing. You cannot stand up in my backyard and thumb your nose at me. You cannot play resource nationalist with your own resources when I need your resources, right? That is the whole question of the Trump corollary. Empire cannot tolerate resistance. And for 25 years, they have applied, economic pressure, economic sanctions, and so on. And it doesn't seem to have worked. So I think they're upping the ante, trying to put military intimidation on the Maduro regime. We do not know how this thing is going to happen. We do not know if it's a bluff. We do not know if they're going to, start to intervene with their missiles and so on. We do not know if they are going to, invade, which I doubt they are. But the point is, they have reached to the point where if all that is left to them to keep Venezuela in line is military intimidation, then it shows how weak the American imperialist system has become. This is how I see it.
Okay, so brother, I read the article fully, so I didn't want to read the entire thing on because it's a pretty long article. So brother Jomo, your take on what prompted you to write this article?
To be honest,
give us more details here.
I wanted to write because I wrote a number of pieces over the last few months on the Venezuela crisis. And I wanted to make the point that the United States is the most violent country on earth. But had I said that, people would have said, there goes Jomo again. So I went back to Martin Luther King, who has built up some credit now over all these years. And in 1967, at the famous speech,
Washington,
why I oppose the war in Vietnam, he made those points that I cited because I wanted to ground. I want to say, look, this is not Jomo speaking here, although it's me speaking. I want to give a Nobel laureate, somebody with high distinction, black person. So I anchored it there. And then I went on to show why I'm saying that the Americans are the largest purveyor of violence. And we have seen it. The important thing, though, is that the mass media, the mainstream media, sanitizes American aggression all the time. So we had the aggression in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and we could even go further. We saw, and it has to do with their disdain for democratic norms and everything else, because sometimes they say, oh, we oppose to dictatorship. But remember, we could go back to 1954, they overthrew Jacob Arbenz in Guatemala. In 65, they overthrew Juan Bosch. In 73, they overthrew Salvador Allende. All of these are elected persons. In 72, Michael Manley was elected and re-elected in 1976. But a lot of the violence we are seeing, gun violence we are seeing in Jamaica, has its genesis in that period when the CIA was funding nefarious forces to get the middle class to run, to try to say, oh man, he doesn't know what he's doing, and so on and so forth. So these guys have no regard for democracy. They have, the only thing they respect is imperial power and imperial dominance and massive extraction of the wealth of the people under the guise of democracy. So that was the point I wanted to make. And I showed my brother Gerry talks about 2007. But let us not forget that President Chavez was elected in 1998, installed in 1999, and by 2002, they're trying to overthrow him in a military coup. So it's only the massive, mighty, righteous indignation uprising of the people that saved the Bolivarian Revolution in 2002. And remember as well that there was a time when Jimmy Carter, a former president of the United States, said that Venezuela had one of the most transparent democratic electoral processes in the world. And what they did was to later to get Carter to walk that back, because they didn't think that is a significant point. But the other point, 2 points that I want to make, and I think Gerry's right, that the guys are not so much concerned about the oil. They're concerned about the example.
Yep, the power
they don't want the resistance.
Yeah,
they don't want the resistance.
Yeah.
So remember, as Marco Rubio and the others, they are going after Venezuela because the real prize in all of this, we have to stamp out that 65, 66 year example that was started by Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and that group of revolutionaries between 1956 and which triumphed in 1959. That's the example. They wanted to stamp out the Grenada example. I mean, it's true the Grenadian revolutions presented the revolution on a platter to imperialism. But all of that pressure on all revolutionary, all alternative processes is to stamp out the example, to make this example not attractive. So they would always say, oh, 7 million people left Venezuela in the last 6-7 years. What they would not say is the 800-pound gorilla, the United States and the EU, have their feet on the neck of the Venezuelan economy, strangling the economy. Imagine a country with the most oil reserves in the world can get access to the IMF and the World Bank and the financiers in Paris and London and so on. Any other country with that kind of resources would get access to credit any place in the world. Any other country, but they want to strangle that. So that's the one point I want to make. And then the other point that Gerry talks about the threats for military invasion. But I think what is even more insidious and even more dangerous is that the guy, and he did say, they may not even carry out the threat of military invasion. But what is happening now is even worse, because what they are doing by tightening his noose. Remember Kissinger? It's a replay of the 1973 lead up to the coup in Chile. Remember, Kissinger told Nixon,
make the economy scream.
We're going to make the economy scream.
Right, make the economy scream.
They're making the economy. They're making the economy scream, and that is even a worse situation, because if you do that, and you put the maximum pressure on with the hope that something would break, the military may break out, civil unrest would break. That is at the expense of Venezuelan lives. You know, if you invade fully, you have a whole myriad of things that can go wrong. Bodies going back and so on.
That's right.
Something happening to one of your warships. But so that's what they don't want. But they're doing and getting what they want by putting on the pressure. And that is why we need more international solidarity. This is why it is my hope. And fortunately, the Soviets and the Chinese are not as reckless as the United States. Because what if those guys would have sent a military ship and say, okay, we are buying this oil, we're going to marshal it into international waters and see that you don't seize it. They're not as reckless as the Americans are. But the Americans don't care about their lives. Remember, there was this Leslie Stahl, this American journalist, Leslie Stahl interview on 60 Minutes, I think it was in 2002, where Leslie Stahl asked, excuse me, Madeleine Albright. She said, Madam Secretary, remember Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State then?
I remember.
Madam
Yeah.
Secretary, information from the UN is that about 350,000 Iraqis had died as a result of the sanctions. And Madeleine Albright looked into the camera and say, look, we think it's worth it.
One correction. It was children.
Children.
Children, yeah. It was
Very
children.
well.
Yeah. Right.
And
Go ahead.
she said she thought it was worth it. In other words, anything. The Americans don't care about lives. They don't care about children. They don't care about old women. They don't care about people. They care about profit. But they have a mass media. They have a mainstream media that sanitizes all of that and puts it in the context of, oh, humanitarian this and so on and so forth. So that was the basis for that article, because I really wanted to show people that in fact, I ended the article, as you would remember, with the Malcolm X's quote, that if we're not careful, the mass media, the mainstream media would allow us to embrace our enemies and despise our friends.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Both you and Gerry made this point about the normalization of violence. And you know, I was reviewing article on Antonio Gramsci, cultural hegemony. And people need to understand this thing. And what Gramsci said is that they make violence and these things natural. They make it normal. You know. And so he said they put values that make it look like it's common sense through institutions like the media and education and so on, and religion. And if you look at what Kamala and her supporters are saying, like I read a piece, one of her supporters said, F Maduro, who Maduro think he is, America back. And it's a kind of, you know, there's an article on Facebook by an academic from the Caribbean. And someone asked a question. There's a chat they had on Facebook. And one of the persons said, well, is this Indian woman who did this and so on? So I was prompted to respond. I said, you know what, not. But I was telling a friend, it is not about whether it's an Indian woman or an African woman. The state of forces agreement was signed by Keith Rowley and the PNM, which is what led us in this situation in the first place, right? And then you now have Kamala, so it is a failure of our institutions. What kind of institutions we have? Educational, social, could produce what I consider as such an ignorant person. So a person that's loyal to our own values and sovereignty. And this is a problem of cultural hegemony, where the US is not just looking at threatening you in these kind of overt ways, but they're interfering in your education system, telling you what to teach. Okay, like an educator was telling me, he was there when a negotiation was taking place to get a grant at UE, and the condition was they had to remove the teaching of the Haitian Revolution as a subject, right? They wanted to remove that from the CXC, and so these are the things that are happening, right? Not just the military and the thing like suspending your visas, but they are penetrating our institutions in overt and covert ways. Now, there's another thing someone brought to my attention this week. I think it's the International Visitors List, some IVI something. I'll have to get it maybe in the next turnaround. But what this is, the United States embassies across the world select young leaders they believe have the potential to be in positions of government, and then groom them by inviting them on these three-week trips to the US. They said Modi was one of those persons who was chosen, right? In my own community in Trinidad, I know two young men, one very, very young guy who was, key guy in our community as a leader. He was taken on one of these trips. One of our MPs was taken on the trips. So it is not just the military side. Is this also what Gramsci speaks about, this hegemonistic, this cultural hegemony that they seek to impose on us, that we must be something else rather than be Caribbean people? I don't know if Gerry want to comment on that.
in my opinion, that approach has been around for a couple of generations. Right? That approach. I remember trade unionists in Trinidad in the 60s. The AIFLD, I don't know if the American Institute for Free Labor Development, which was the external arm of the AFL-CIO, which was actually, in a sense, cat's paw of the department. Yeah, that's right. There were people even from the OWTU who went on these trips and so on. In fact, it ended up where Eric Williams actually deported the guy who was controlling the AFLD. It was a black guy, I can't remember his name now. Because the thing became so overt and so blatant then that, Eric Williams intervened and he shut down the office there and so on. The question of soft power, that is what they call these things. The cultural hegemony you're talking about. I mean, we have been looking at American television from the day television appeared in the Caribbean. Now it is even worse. I mean, it's cable, 10,000 cable stuff showing all kinds of rubbish and so on. So we have been acculturated into these things for about 2 or 3 generations at least, well, in terms of the American thing, since the Second World War. And remember how Trinidad was. Trinidad in the Second World War was an American base, right? And a lot of stuff that is now being identified as, Trinidadian characteristics and so on was because of that and so on. Look at the Calypso tent. It sounds strange. The Calypso tent took a real boost because of the American presence in Trinidad in the Second World War. The whole question of rum and Coca-Cola, prostitution and all these things, right? So my point is, these things have been going on for a couple of generations. That I suspect is being intensified now in a much more organized way. You talk about the question of infiltrating the institutions and so on. That is correct. In Trinidad, we're in a situation where there is no social or political, economic institution that has any credibility anymore. Nobody cares about what they say, what the politicians say, what the trade unionists do, what the churches do, and so on, right? And things. So what we have going on here now, to me, is the intensification of that soft power is ending up in hard power then. Because I suspect that after 25 years of trying to terrorize Venezuela and not achieving it, not overthrowing the Bolivarian revolution and so on, they have probably come to the conclusion, I hope not, that, well, this is the last step, let's go at him, that kind of stuff, right? So my real concern here is not so much that, my concern is what is the effect. What are the consequences for the Caribbean community? What are the consequences for the Caribbean community? What is the American attitude towards CARICOM, right? Look what is happening in CARICOM. Every day, some junior minister in the Kamala Prasad cabinet is jumping up and cussing out, Gaston Brown, or cussing out this one and saying all these guys are shithounds and so on.
So we need to go to break just now here. So let me just get Jomo for about 2 minutes. We need to go to break. Jomo for about 2 minutes, and then we go to break. If you want to make any response to what Gerry said.
Yeah, well, I totally support what Gerry Kangalee says. And you, in your point, you see, imperialism is understanding that it has hard power and it has soft power. And as you correctly said, across the region for many, many years now, this is nothing new. They would look for young, up-and-coming, emerging persons, influencers, possible upcoming leaders, and take them to tours across the United States. The Israelis do that as well.
Yeah.
With the hope that they can plant a seed, they can have a germ that they may be able to pull back on later. What we know the Israelis did, and I have no doubts that the Americans and Europeans have done it, is that they have compromised people, put them in certain positions, either through money, corrupt money, dark money, pornography, sex, whatever they can do, they use it to ensnare people. Because these people, we think about next Sunday's program. They're thinking about a program that will be aired on 2015. Yeah, so I totally agree with that. And look, it's a hard task. It's particularly difficult where the left, the progressive forces in the region have been on the back foot now for what, 40 years since the implosion of the Grenadian Revolution. And it does not seem as though we are about to make any rapid forward advance. But those of us who are committed to it have to just stick with it step by step, with the hope that the next generation is going to catch, because I have absolute confidence in the next generation. I am not a pessimist at all. I know that there are a lot of things that are happening that we don't like, but our parents used to say the same thing about us.
Absolutely.
I better believe that.
And we emerged. Mommy used to tell me, I know you're going straight to jail, and when you go there, I'm not coming to see you. I didn't go to jail. Yeah.
Exactly. On that note, we take a break. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. Absolutely.
Yes.
It's an massive season with massive deals and rewards at Penny's. From now through December 31st, earn double B-Bucks on store-wide purchasing every Saturday. That's right, 2 times the B-Bucks, which means 2 times the cash back when shopping at Penny's. Plus, get even more rewards with B-Bucks Builders on home goods, tiles, appliances, paints, and lights. And don't forget, there's also massive deals and discounts on tiles and the best brands in paints like Benjamin Moore and BH. Rewards, deals, B-Bucks. You can get it all this massive season only at Penny's. Quality and savings.
This holiday season, stay connected across borders with Smart's Mexico and now USA roaming bundles. Available now through December 31st. Enjoy 4,096 megabytes of roaming data for only $27 or other packages for as low as $8. Staying home for the holidays? Sign up for a postpaid plan and get a Samsung A16 for as low as $190 or Samsung A26 for $315, or pick up devices without a plan starting at $100 for our GST weekend special. And this December, text to win. Simply text WIN to 438 for your chance to win big. Each entry is just $1 of prepaid credit. More entries mean more chances to win daily prizes like fuel vouchers, groceries, and more, leading to our big giveaway week, December 15th to 24th. We're giving away amazing prizes like fridge, TV, stove. And on December 24th, the grand prize of $5,000 will be announced. These deals won't last long, so make the smart switch today. Travel more, share more, and save more with Smart. Smart, bringing people together.
Still like one dream, because I say at the age of 63, I can say I own my own house. I can honestly say, and it get me weak. Before this, I was living on the mobile home, right? And then after a while, it started to go in and start to lock up and things.
1, 2, 3.
Actually, I may give up. I used to cry and night time. I said, Lord, please. And there comes Miss Mar. I always say, if you're not serious about something, don't pray for it. Don't pray about it. And I ask my God, please lead the Good Samaritan to me.
The housing program of the government of Belize, which is administered through the Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing, is definitely, without question, one of the best programs our government has to offer, providing an opportunity for Belizeans who are in need to own their own home. And so I'm very, very happy for Ms. Beverly Harris and her family. She has been asking for support and help with her home for a long time. And I'm very, very glad that with the kind support of the Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing, that we were able to get this done for her.
I'm thankful. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give 20. I love it. I love it.
One of the reasons I applied for a credit card at Atlantic Bank was because I travel a lot. I'm always going here and there and everywhere, and having that card made my life so much easier. I could literally charge everything. I had no issues. I don't have to worry about carrying money, and that has been one of the most effective points. Using my Atlantic Bank credit card has improved my life drastically. I learned to budget properly, the online service that it gives, the features that it has, and also knowing that when I'm shopping online, it has a protective feature for it. Having an Atlantic Bank credit card, especially having two sons that are always wanting something. They want to shop here and they want to shop there. The good part about it is I get to look at Atlantic online to see where my spending is and to make sure I'm staying in budget.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
Oh, I wasn't having a bad day. I just needed...
It's here, the biggest sale of the year. Find your happy place at Builders Hardware with our happy sale from October 15th to December 31st. Whether you're a contractor or a DIY pro, we got unbeatable prices that will put a big smile on your face. Freshen up your walls with 20% off all paints and 25% off paint supplies. Upgrade your space with 25% off lights, fans, AC, and a wide selection of tiles to match your style. Plus, enjoy 30 to 50% off selective items. But that's not all. We also sell sand and gravel, blocks, roofing, and more. Find everything you need from construction start to finish. Don't miss out on our happy deals. Shop today or explore our online store at shopbuildersbz.com. Visit Builders Hardware in Belmopan. This is your happy place.
This a creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. From the border to the boulevard, physical fit. On to my agony, strength in a it. Big up the farmer champions, them we do it. But who will take the crown in a 2026? This a creme New Year's Day cycling classic. Straight to Belize from the northern district. To win this with a heavy cyclist stream. They make them boast, them take the sugar and cream. This a creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream. Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream.
It's the Creme New Year's Day Cycling Classic. All top-class riders hit the pavement for the start of the cycling calendar. Thursday, January 1st, it's the Creme New Year's Day Cycling Classic.
This a Creme New Year's Day cycling classic. The sugar and the cream, the sugar and the cream, 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 cream.
Good afternoon once again. Welcome to Sunday Review, the only news show in Belize where we try to make sense of the news from around the Caribbean. Our guests this morning are Jomo Sanga Thomas from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Brother Gerry Kangalee, Trade Unionist from Trinidad. We will move into the last part of our show, and the headline we're going to look at beginning of this section of the show is titled 8.4 billion for oil giants, 2.6 billion for Guyana. This is a headline out of the Guyana newspapers. So the headline is 8.4 billion for oil giants, 2.6 billion for Guyana, as PSA profit split comes under fire. So let me just read a bit of this. ExxonMobil, Hess, and CNOOC raked in 8.4 billion in profits from Guyana's Stabroek block in 2024, while Guyana, entitled to a 50% share, received just US 2.6 billion, raising renewed concerns about how profits are calculated under the production sharing agreement called the PSA. While one may argue that this key detail is public knowledge, Guyana gains 50% profit after the operator deducts 75% for cost recovery and 2% royalty from gross production. The Stabroek partners have been pocketing massive profits from the deal, while the country which owns the resources sees paltry returns. Exxon, a 45% shareholder in the block, reported a profit of over $4 billion for the year ending December 2024. Financial statements for Hess, the 30% shareholder, shows the company earned over $3 billion, while CNOOC, while with the remaining 25% share, bagged $530 million during the same period. This means that the partners together pocketed a massive $8 billion for the year 2024. Notably, Guyana should be receiving 50% of the profits from the Starbuck block, or half of the revenue from crude sales in accordance with the provisions of the 2016 PSA. However, Guyana received just about a quarter of the $8.4 billion that the Starbuck block partners gained from the deal. Deposits into the Natural Resource Fund in 2024 totaled just about $2.6 billion, raising questions about the method of calculation for the profits under contract. So, my good comrades here this morning, your take on this situation in Ghana. Maybe we could bring with Gerry, who was a member of the OWTU and would have been in negotiations with the oil companies, and then we could hear from Brother Jomo. So this issue of the arrangement between Guyana and the oil companies that are exploiting the resources of Guyana. You need to unmute, Gerry. You're muted. Unmute. Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I mean, transnational energy corporations, the biggest corporations in the world. What do you expect from them? In Trinidad, you know, there are two aspects to this thing. Guyana is a new oil producer with a lot of inexperienced people handling the negotiations and so on with the multinational corporations. The transnational corporations, they know how to move. They know who to bribe. They know how to set up your contracts where you can't even understand half of what it is the contracts are saying. They're drawn up by all these big international lawyers and so on. And if you don't have the people, who could find their way through all the legal verbiage and so on, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But even so, even if you have good negotiators, experienced people and so on, the imbalance of power is that great. Here we are in a little third world country, Guyana or Trinidad and so on, and there is oil out there in the sea, and we want the oil and so on, but we can't do it for ourselves, can we? So we have to turn to these multinational corporations. They have their own interests to serve, right? So my point is, yeah, we could go into all the details, about how, what's the name of the company? Exxon? How Exxon was ripping off.
Yeah.
Right? Exxon Hess, yes, because they got rid of the other one. I think Hess bought into it. Yeah. We could go into all the details and so on. But basically, you have a situation where international capital holds most of the cards when it comes to these negotiations and so on, and their relationship with these small third world countries and so on. But what you would also have, and let's be clear about it, there are people within the political elites here in the Caribbean, I know about Trinidad and so on, and people within the comprador capitalist class who benefits from these things, right? I mean, if you look at what is happening, let's take a look at what is going to happen to Guyana. In Guyana, a lot of money is being circulated, a lot of big projects are being done. We know about that in Trinidad, Aku, all these nice big projects and so on. And a lot of capital is invested, a lot of capital is squirreled away, a lot of it is going into corrupt deals and so on. And after all is said and done, and people at a certain level benefit from these things, and the masses become more poor. Because a lot of the energy industry doesn't employ too many people. In terms of employment, it's a small workforce. So it is not the question of they are providing jobs and so on. No, they're not doing that. The people who provide the jobs are the small and medium enterprises and so on, who are under pressure and so on, and who depend upon CARICOM, to be able to do their thing. And in fact, after the government, the manufacturing sector in Trinidad is the largest employer of labor, right? So what we are seeing is that the multinationals are going along their way and so on. And when people like Maduro or Chavez and these people in Venezuela have decided that they wanted a bigger cut in the thing, that is what caused the problem. That is what caused the problem. Chavez didn't nationalize the oil industry, you know. People believe he nationalized it. He didn't nationalize the oil industry. He went for a bigger cut. He went for 60% where he was probably getting a 30% and so on. And a lot of the transnationals who were operating in Venezuela, a lot of them adapted to it, except ConocoPhillips and who's the other one?
Exxon.
Exxon again, the same Exxon, right?
Exxon, yeah.
And so on, and they carried the Venezuelan state and gone through all kinds of arbitrations and so on, and got all kinds of settlements and so on. You at that level, you can't fight them. You can't fight them at that level.
Right, so
what
we
you
have
have to fight them to is short.
We're short on time, so I want to hear Jomo, because I want to deal with one article before we shut off, because we're short on time. We just have a few. So let me hear, Brother Jomo, your response to this Guyana situation.
Well, I unite with everything. Well, most of what my brother Kangalee says. Where I depart is I don't agree that because Guyana has no resource, that the Guyanese needed to give away the entire basket of fish as they seem to have done.
Right.
I remember some years ago, Equatorial Guinea had negotiated a deal with, I think it's the French oil company, where they were supposed to get a cent of every dollar.
My God.
And it was so unconscionable that they turned out, they hired a series of, well, not a series, a group of international arbitration law specialists and so on. And they were able to break out of that agreement and get, I can't remember what the final thing was, but it was much more than 1 cent. So there's sufficient expertise in the world now. You may have to pay for it, but in the same way you're giving it away to these big companies, as we are seeing here, 8 billion to them and 2 million. So they're getting 80% of the resource. And remember, you know, that is only after these people own accounting. It may be 16 billion.
Yeah, you're
You know
correct.
what I mean? That's their own
That is
accounting.
right.
It may be 16 billion that they're getting. So that's my slight shade there, that they can go,
Right.
and then it goes back to some of the negotiations that Chetty Jagan and Janet Jagan and Jack Dio and those others made. But I want to go back to Equatorial Guinea for this point. The son of the leader then, I can't recall his name. He lived in Paris.
Yeah.
And he had a, well, I can't call it a walk-in closet because they said he had 1,000 suits. Apparently he had a house in which he was putting suits.
Yeah.
So the comprador class in these societies make a tremendous amount of money. As you were saying, Brother Kangalee, they know, these companies know who to bribe. They know who to butter their hand. So, and I remember when I was sitting in the parliament one time, I made a statement. I said, look, the difference between me and you, some of you, you know, I come from a line of people with money. I come from the line of Mansa Musa, where we traveled across Africa and swamped the entire place. I know what money is. You all don't know what the political class in the Caribbean don't know what money is. They would sell out the whole country for 10,000 t-shirts that they can get at an election cycle. So a lot of these guys, they give away the resource of the people. And as you were making the point, the oil sector is rather small. So you are depending on the money to spread it around as the Venezuelans did. Right? When Chavez them start doing what they're doing, the Venezuelans have built 7 million homes.
That's right.
Healthcare free, dental care free. I've been to Venezuela and saw a guy who said, it's the first time a dentist ever looked into my mouth. and the man was 50, 60 years old. Yeah. So that's the difference. And that is why these guys would do everything and anything. You have some progressive, you have some radical, they would demonize him, they would demonize her, they would say that she's the devil reincarnate because they want to turn the people against
Yeah, so
them.
I have to cut you off here. Sorry about that because we are literally ran out of time because there's one
No, go ahead, brother, go ahead.
Yeah, which you all raised, both of you all raised the issue about CARICOM. And so this article here is CARICOM. And so I want to get your take on it as a closing point because I think this is important for people of the Caribbean to understand. The headline, and this came out of, I think it was Barbados, this headline came out of. It's called CARICOM's New Crisis. In times of crisis, a good place to start the search for answers is in history, looking for how similar or relevant situations were had in the past. Having only recently clawed its way back to a path of potential stability and for delivering on its promises, there's little doubt that the Caribbean Community CARICOM is again facing a deep and conceivably existential crisis. It has been brought here by Kamala Persad Bissessar, the Kafkaesque Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who has firmly aligned Trinidad and Tobago with the Trump administration muscular policy in the Caribbean, to the point of berating CARICOM for its solidarity with member states squeezed by American actions. Perhaps the last time that CARICOM has faced this level of institutional stress and questions about its capacity to survive is the period leading up to and in the aftermath of America's 1983 invasion of Grenada, following the implosion of Maurice Bishop, People's Revolutionary Government, and the killing of Mr. Bishop. Issues now confronting the Caribbean are in context of the Trump's administration approach to global relations, quantitatively more complex and therefore more difficult to maneuver and resolve than 4 decades ago. Today, there is no predictably world order of settled institutional arrangements which small, vulnerable countries like those in the Caribbean can readily find some cover. I will stop here. It goes on, but we are very short on time. So let me hear Brother Kangalee's comment on this for about 5 minutes, and then Jomo will close off. Yes.
I would like to, well, I'm not aware much of it, but people are saying that one of the questions of CARICOM and relationship with the United States is that the United States was never in favor of CARICOM. I do not know if that is so or not. Maybe Brother Jomo could, elucidate on that. But what is, I mean, it is clear what is happening. My Prime Minister is obviously carrying out some kind of strategy that has been worked out with the US in terms of not only Venezuela, but in terms of CARICOM, because all of a sudden CARICOM is a big issue with the Venezuelan thing. Why? Why is that so? Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit. You remember PetroCaribe? PetroCaribe was going, Trinidad used to be the place where, and so-called energy security in the, at least in the English-speaking Caribbean, depended upon Trinidad and Tobago. So in those days, we used to manufacture stuff like before we closed down the refinery, right? And we used to supply the Caribbean market. Venezuela came up with the PetroCaribe stuff, which was a much better deal, and so on, long-term loans and so on at low interest rates and so on. And the question of energy security in the Caribbean was shifting away from countries like Trinidad and Tobago, which in actual fact is not Trinidad and Tobago, It's BP and Amoco and Shell and so on. They who control the industry. So when people said, well, how come Trinidad wasn't involved in the PetroCaribe thing? The only way Trinidad could have been involved in that is if they had their own status. We had Petrotrin, but Petrotrin was not enough. You had to have your own thing. You had to have your own marketing stuff. You had to have your own ships and all of that to carry forward the thing. And I remember, Ako, you remember I wrote something somewhere around 2006 dealing with that issue in terms of our relationship to Venezuela and the fact that the Americans were very disturbed about that whole question of PetroCaribe that was going to the other islands in the Caribbean. Trinidad was not involved. I could understand why they weren't involved. Barbados was not involved, which I'm not too sure, what was the situation there. But what we saw is a situation where in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a real strong economic relationship in CARICOM. I mean, we are the center of the CARICOM thing in terms of production and so on. And yet you have your prime minister every 2 days, sticking her finger into the wound, if you want to put it like that, and causing more and more problems. I am convinced that whatever is happening there is coming not just from the government of Trinidad and Tobago, but we are acting as a cat's paw
Another
for
source.
what the United States want. I'm not sure what it is the United States really wants.
All right, I have to cut
with
you
all
off,
this,
unfortunately. I have to cut you right at the time, but Jomo, got a couple of minutes for you.
Yeah, I think my brother, I think you know precisely what the Americans want. You implied it.
Okay.
They want this unity. They don't want our people to be united. And we saw this before. Remember when they hoist Guaido on the Venezuelans in 2019, they had what was called a Lima group. And they had some different countries in there. And Jamaica was one. But interestingly, remember in 2021, when you had that crisis, when there was an issue in the Organization of American States, and Trinidad took the position. Guaido had argued in the OAS that Trinidad was not doing sufficient international humanitarian work to protect Venezuelans who were leaving. And Jamaica and some other countries sided, I think Bahamas and Haiti, sided with the Americans and Almagro, the Secretary General,
I remember
against Trinidad.
Yes.
So I'm not, that's why I'm making the point that these guys don't even understand the history, because in 2021, Trinidad was being attacked. And I remember the former foreign minister of St. Vincent, Camilo Gonzalez, Raul Gonzalez's son, wrote a piece called The Requiem for CARICOM. I don't know if you remember that. And he said that constituted the death of CARICOM. He says CARICOM may go on as an institution, but it is functionally dead. And I think what we are seeing now is precisely that. Because we can even go further back. And remember when Eric Williams said that the Americans and the British, they never wanted a strong federation. And he said that when the British were leaving the Caribbean, they so much wanted to break. He said they had sucked the Caribbean like an orange. And the only thing they were trying to do is to ensure they don't slip on the orange peel and fall. So the Americans want to keep us disunited. The EU have this position. They too want to keep us disunited, as we see in Haiti, as we see in some of these other countries. So it's a bad situation, but out of these terrible situations come opportunities. It's for us to, I think people are going to see clearer. People are going to get a better understanding. It may not be the mad rush that we want to see, but clearly there's that discerning understanding among the people that's growing day by day. And I'm hoping that brings the new dawn that so many of us have lived all our lives for and want to see. So, Aku, I want to thank you so much for inviting me yet again.
Thank you all for this wonderful discussion this morning on XTV and Creme Radio.
Aku, just before you close off, I just want to put one thing in here. And I remember my brother here had quoted Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Henry Kissinger and apply it to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, right? To be America's friend.
I think I know the quote you're coming with.
Yeah. To be America's friend is fatal. It wasn't just dangerous, it's fatal. So I just want to put that there.
Yes.
So yes. I think that's an excellent point.
That's an excellent quote. To America, to be a friend of ours is fatal. Brothers, I want to thank you all for a wonderful discussion.
To be an enemy is dangerous, but with a friend is fatal.
Right. That's right.
I want to thank you all for your perspectives on the news. This show will repeat itself at 5:30 p.m. this evening on Creme Radio and XTV. Again, thank you all very much. I want to say thanks to the security guard, Shane Flowers, to the producer, Sister Alexi, and also to Christy Flowers, who was the earlier producer who had to leave, and to our host and producer, Sister Yaya Marin Coleman, who's actually out of the country. We want to thank our listening audience at XTV and Creme Radio in Belize, and to let you all know that this is one of the few independent stations in the Caribbean, XTV, Creme Radio, and also our Mandala newspaper, which came out of the struggle of the people of Belize in the 1970s. So, brothers, comrades, thank you all again, and thanks to our listening audience for this edition of Sunday Review. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Guatemala,